Churchill considered him slow. He considered him defeatist. He considered him lacking imagination. He removed him from the highest military position in the British Army. Marshal considered him irreplaceable. When he died, Marshal arranged an unprecedented act of Congress to bury him in Arlington National Cemetery. He wrote to the man's widow, "I personally have lost a dear friend, unique in my lifetime, and never to be out of my mind." They were talking about the same man, Field Marshal Sir John Dill. Churchill fired him. Marshal could not replace him. The gap between those two assessments, and why it existed, is what this case file is about. John Grier Dill was born in County Armagh, Ireland, in 1881, 1 year after George Marshall was born in Pennsylvania. He had attended the British Military College at Sandhurst, where Marshall had attended the Virginia Military Institute. Two men prepared for military careers through parallel institutions on opposite sides of the Atlantic. Dill had served with distinction in the Boer War and the First World War. He had commanded at multiple levels, earned a reputation as a careful and thorough planner, and risen through the interwar years to the highest military position in the British Army. He became Chief of the Imperial General Staff in May 1940, the same month Germany invaded France. He served through Dunkirk, through the Battle of Britain, through the beginning of the North African Campaign. He had been there through the worst year of the war, advising Churchill through the darkest days Britain had faced in generations. And Churchill had concluded that he was slow, defeatist, and lacking imagination. Dill's biographer Alex Danchev described the Churchill-Dill relationship in terms that left no ambiguity. It was an association strikingly lacking in empathy or understanding, etched in fundamental disagreement, and scarred by a mutual disaffection welling up at times into personal distaste. Churchill wanted a CIGS who would execute his strategic vision. Dill believed Churchill's strategic instincts were often wrong, that the Prime Minister's enthusiasm for Middle Eastern operations and his impatience with military timelines were producing plans that could not be executed without catastrophic losses. Dill told Churchill this. Churchill did not want to hear it. Dill confided to another officer after one particularly difficult meeting, "The Prime Minister lost his temper with me. I could see the blood come up in his great neck, and his eyes began to flash." By late 1941, Churchill had decided Dill had to go. Dill's record was too distinguished for a simple dismissal. Churchill found the solution generals use when they want to move someone without confronting them directly. He promoted him. Dill was to become governor of India, prestigious, distant, and far from the decisions that mattered. The promotion was a removal. Then Pearl Harbor happened. December 7th, 1941. The Japanese attacked. Hitler declared war on the United States 4 days later. With America in the conflict, Britain suddenly had a powerful new ally. But the alliance required management. American and British strategic priorities were not identical. American military doctrine was not British doctrine. American political constraints were not British constraints. Someone had to bridge the two militaries at the highest level. Churchill's solution was John Dill. The man he had been trying to move to India became, instead, the head of the British Joint Staff Mission in Washington. He arrived in Washington in January 1942. Churchill thought he was solving two problems, removing Dill from London and placing him in a role that seemed important but was actually peripheral. He was wrong on the second count. Marshall and Dill had first encountered each other 4 months before Pearl Harbor, in August 1941, at the Atlantic Conference. The Atlantic Conference was the meeting at which Roosevelt and Churchill first met in person during the war, held in secret, aboard warships off the coast of Newfoundland. Their military staffs accompanied them. The discussions were intense. American and British military officers were meeting, in many cases, for the first time, trying to understand each other's institutions, priorities, and constraints. The Americans were not yet in the war. They were assessing what a British alliance would look like if they entered it. The British were trying to convince the Americans that the war was theirs to join. Marshall and Dill met in this context. The Marshall Foundation's account identifies what was discovered. During the conference, Marshall and Dill discovered that they both believed that frank discussions of issues would enable the British-American alliance to function most efficiently and avoid unnecessary disagreements. Two men from two different armies had found, in those first conversations, a shared conviction about how an alliance was supposed to work. Not through the managed diplomacy that official channels produce, not through the careful positions that each country's political leadership had authorized, through direct, frank exchange of what was actually true. The conversation at the Atlantic Conference was the seed. Washington, 6 months later, was where it grew. Here is the moment this case file turns on. Churchill, through the normal channels of government, shared his communications with Roosevelt with the British military leadership, including Dill. Dill received these messages. He was supposed to read them, understand them, and use them to represent British interests in Washington. He was not supposed to share them with the Americans. He shared them with Marshall, without telling Churchill. The military.com account of this arrangement is precise. Without telling Churchill, Dill voluntarily provided Marshall with his telegrams from London, providing the Chief of Staff with critical insight to the President's thinking. It was a calculated act that could have destroyed Dill's career, but proved to be invaluable for Marshall. Marshall reciprocated. The Defense Media Network account records the other direction. Since Churchill shared relevant communications from Roosevelt with Dill through Brooke, Dill made a point of letting Marshall not only read those messages, but also ones confidentially marked for his own information. Marshall showed Dill all of his secret messages that affected the British war effort. Two senior military officers had constructed a private channel of complete transparency. Their political masters did not know about it. It was a calculated breach of protocol. It was also the operational foundation of the Allied coalition. The specific working method that Dill and Marshall developed is preserved in a document at the Marshall Foundation. When Churchill sent Dill a message asking him to assess Marshall's opinion on some strategic question, Dill did not assess Marshall's opinion. He brought the message to Marshall. He asked, "How are we going to answer it?" Not, "What does Marshall think?" Not, "How should I represent British interests?" But, "How are we going to answer it?" The shift from I to we is the entire mechanism of this story. Churchill thought he was sending a question to his representative in Washington. His representative was asking the question's target to help write the answer. What Churchill received was not British intelligence about the American position. What Churchill received was the answer that both Dill and Marshall had agreed was the accurate description of the situation. Churchill could replace him. Marshall could not. What Marshall had in Dill was specific, not a liaison officer who transmitted messages, but a man who had decided the alliance's success mattered more than his own position in it, and who was willing to breach protocol to make it work. President Roosevelt understood this. He called Dill the most important figure in the remarkable accord which has been developed in the combined operations of our two countries. In the summer of 1944, Dill was diagnosed with aplastic anemia, a condition in which the bone marrow fails to produce enough blood cells, treatable with blood transfusions, not curable by the medicine of 1944. The diagnosis meant a specific thing. Time could be extended, but the outcome was fixed. Dill was given a choice: return to England, receive care at home, spend whatever time he had left in his own country, near his family, rest, or stay in Washington. He stayed. He continued as head of the British Joint Staff Mission through 1944, receiving blood transfusions at intervals to keep him functional, attending meetings of the combined chiefs of staff, maintaining the private channel with Marshall that had held the coalition together for 3 years. He did not reduce his schedule. He did not signal to the British government that he was dying. He stayed because the work was not finished. The Normandy landings had succeeded in June 1944, but the war in Europe was not over. The Pacific Campaign continued. The coalition required the same management in the final year of the war that it had required in the first. He died at Walter Reed Hospital on November 4th, 1944. He had been in Washington continuously since January 1942. He had chosen to die there rather than return to England. His widow learned of his death in Washington. The Marshall Foundation's account states simply, he chose to stay in Washington and work as long as possible. The work was not finished. He stayed until he could no longer stay. 4 days after Dill died, a funeral service was held at Washington National Cathedral. The combined chiefs of staff served as honorary pallbearers. Flags flew at half-staff across Washington. A motorized cortege moved through streets flanked by thousands of soldiers. Then Congress passed a joint resolution, a special act, allowing Dill to be buried at Arlington National Cemetery. No foreign soldier had been buried there before. President Roosevelt signed the resolution and awarded Dill the Army Distinguished Service Medal posthumously. Marshall wrote to Dill's widow, "I know that it is not necessary for me to tell you of my distress of mind at this moment. Officially, the United States has suffered a heavy loss, and I personally have lost a dear friend, unique in my lifetime, and never to be out of my mind." He wrote to Alan Brooke, the British chief of the Imperial General Staff, "We mourn with you the passing of a great and wise soldier, and a great gentleman." 6 years later, on November 1st, 1950, Marshall, now Secretary of Defense, stood at Arlington with President Truman. They unveiled an equestrian statue of Dill on horseback atop his grave, an honor accorded to only one other soldier in the entire cemetery. The statue stands at the entrance to Arlington National Cemetery today.